Everybody loves Raheem Morris, but Locked On Rams is going to give us the scoop on if everybody's going to love his defense.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And, of course, the very humble host of this illustrious podcast. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys that is an everydayer of this pod, and it makes it your first listen or first watch of the day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, I am joined by Travis Rodgers of Locked On Rams. He's going to give us the scoop on Raheem Morris and Zack Robinson. You know, obviously almost nearly a month after the move was made, but obviously a lot of stuff happened earlier this month with Senior Bowl stuff. So we'll have some more Rams guests on in the future as well to talk more about this coaching staff as well. But we'll get into that. And at the end of the episode, you'll get my thoughts on some potential cap cuts, including whether or not we should be worried about Grady Jarrett and Younghoe Koo potentially being on the roster bubble. But without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Travis Rodgers of Locked On Rams right now. Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, joined by another illustrious guest. He is Travis Rodgers, the co-host of the Locked On Rams podcast. And of course, he's going to be here talking with us about some ex-Rams that are current Falcons, including Raheem Morris, new Falcons head coach, and Zack Robinson, new Falcons offensive coordinator. Travis, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aaron. It's good to be here.
So let's start off talking about the new head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, who Falcon fans are somewhat familiar with from his time in Atlanta previously.
Sure.
But you can share a little bit more insight into the last 3 years of Raheem Morris's time in LA. So what do you think the Falcons are getting in Raheem Morris as their next head coach?
Here's what I know for sure what they're getting is somebody that was universally liked and universally respected inside the Rams building. This was somebody that in the 3 years that he was here, like you mentioned, that somebody, you know, I've been covering the Rams for 8 seasons. I've been their pregame, halftime, and postgame show host for 3 seasons. I'm around a lot of the players. I talk to a lot of people inside the organization, and without exception, everybody held him in incredibly high regard. And they all said the same thing about him, which is he has a way of connecting with people that is not normal. And that is just, it is an extra level up on a way to connect, a way to communicate, and a way to make people feel like they're part of something special. And I think that when it comes to coaching football, all of these guys in this league know football, right? They know where to put the safety. They know how to line up this or whatever it may be, whatever their specialty may be. But that ability to communicate, that ability to create culture, I think is what makes guys different from good to great and great to maybe particularly special. It's what Sean McVay did when he rolled in here after having a Rams team that had been kind of moribund for the better part of a decade, and he changed it in a heartbeat. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if Raheem Morris was able to do the same thing in Atlanta. Just he's a very special guy, and people really respond to his leadership.
Now, we're not going to get too deep in the X's and O's, but is there a general theme with Raheem Morris's defense of the last 3 years that, Falcon fans can sort of apply? Obviously, Jimmy Lake is going to be expected to call the defensive plays for the Falcons, but certainly Raheem Morris will have some influence on this defense. And so what maybe is a general theme or or something like that you would say to describe Raheem Morris's defense the last 3 years?
Yeah, it's funny because I think what I'm about to say is going to make Rams fans bang their head on their dashboards if they're listening to this in their car, because it was the one complaint about a Raheem Morris defense that came in a year after year. It's a whole bend and don't break mentality, right? It's that thing that you can give up some plays. You're going to let the people are able to move the ball. But when you get inside, maybe that 30-yard line or so, that's when things get very, very hard. They don't give up a lot of touchdowns. They might give up some field goals here or there, but it can be frustrating because the ball is moving. But what I can say about Raheem Morris's defense is when they had to get off the field, they were usually able to do it. That they were a team that they were much better after halftime, it seemed like to me. I think you can look at the playoff game against the Lions as a really good example of that, where it felt like the Lions were just walking up and down the field on them in the first half, which they were. In the second half, they weren't able to do anything. That they really make some incredible adjustments along the way. So this is not going to be a situation like the 85 Bears where the ball just never moves and it's 3 and out. And this is one of the great defenses of all time. You're going to be frustrated at times, but I would say to everybody that would listen to the podcast, that would call my radio show, how many points did they give up at the end of the day? And it usually wasn't very many. That the ball moves, but they don't give up a ton of points. That's kind of the general takeaway that I had with him over the last few seasons.
Yeah, that's the general vibe I've gotten watching the Rams defense the last couple of years. Obviously, I haven't watched as much as you have, but it seems like whatever they need to do in order to win, they kind of do that, right? If that takes an in-game adjustment, if that means, getting tight in the red zone and getting off the field on third downs, it's not always pretty, but they'll put that Rams offense in a position to be able to win that game.
Yeah, I like how you put it, that it's rarely pretty. It's rarely where you're like, oh, man, they are just stuffing people, but it works. It's effective. And I think, one of the things that I remember talking to him about, that, and I asked him, how do you coach Aaron Donald, right? And I think it resonates to kind of not just coaching a Hall of Fame player like Aaron Donald, but rather his philosophy at large is, I need to do whatever these guys do well and put them in a position to do it. So if you have a team that can get to the quarterback, put those guys in a position to do that. If you have a team that can take the ball away, put them in a position to do that. If you have a team that's led by the secondary, perhaps defensively, then put them in a position to do that. He's not going to try to put a square peg into a round hole. He's going to figure out what works for his personnel and put them in a position to be successful.
So there's more to come on today's Locked On Falcons with Travis Rodgers of Locked On Rams. And that includes some insight into what Zack Robinson is going to bring to the table for this Falcons offense. But guys, I want to tell you that this next segment is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. And sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let it out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. And while we're excited to talk about this new Falcons coaching staff, you may be excited about other things in your life, or you may be a little down on certain things in your life. And therapy can be a way for you to express yourself. It can be different for everyone. And most of us have bigger problems than what our favorite sports teams, coaches, and new coaching staff is looking like. And it's important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Just visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Now, talking about putting personnel in a position to be successful, that's something the Falcons are hoping that their new offensive coordinator, Zack Robinson, will wind up doing. And, he garnered a lot of interest this offseason, not only from other teams, but of course from Falcon fans who, you look at his pedigree, but lack of play calling experience. That's an interesting combination, right? I know he did some play calling during the preseason in recent summers, and we've seen when we talk about pedigree, we've seen the McVay coaching tree is very strong. That pipeline of play callers, whether you're talking about Matt LaFleur, Zach Taylor, Kevin O'Connell, those guys have gone on to be very successful. And I'm curious, do you think Zack Robinson is sort of the next in line to put another feather in Sean McVay's hat?
Well, I think so, and here's why. Because really, the guys from the McVay tree, and I'm telling you, I don't know whether to call it a tree, an orchard, a forest, a grove, or whatever it is. Because for a guy that hasn't turned 40 yet, he's got a lot of saplings out there in the NFL. Really, the only thing that hasn't worked so far is Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley was a defensive-oriented coach. Brandon Staley, I don't think, had what we were talking about at the beginning, Aaron, that ability to communicate and resonate his message effectively with a large group of people. It just never felt like he connected with his guys. Whether Zack Robinson can do that, time will tell. But I know that coming from the offensive side, coming from the McVay shop when it comes to calling plays, a lot of these guys, like the guys that you just mentioned, they seem to hit the ground running. And I think that one of the great talents that Sean McVay has, and I think this will apply to Zack Robinson, is he's got a very keen eye for talent. He's got a very keen eye for offensive talent. So if he's decided that I want this person on my staff, or I want this person to be involved in my quarterbacks or my offensive coordinator, you can rest assured that they're pretty innovative, that they're willing to listen and learn, because very few of Sean McVay's guys, it's not zero, but very few of them have really struggled when they stepped up to that next step.
Now, obviously, if you had the answer to this, would be much appreciated. But, what sort of expectation should Falcon fans have for this Zack Robinson offense? Is it, obviously because he lacks that experience where we can only sort of speculate on this, but, just coming from where he's been the last couple of years in LA, what sort of insights do you think you could provide Falcon fans with that?
Well, I think, it's funny when you think about like a Sean McVay led offense, and it's hard to be completely honest, Aaron. It's a little hard to separate what's McVay and what's his coaches until they step out on their own. So I think that you will probably be able to give me a better idea of what Zack Robinson does well or not, a year from now, having gotten a chance to watch him for a whole year, because when stuff goes right, the credit tends to go towards Sean McVay as the head coach. So it's a little hard to kind of split that hair. I can tell you this. I do think that McVay gets a bit of bad rap's not the word, because it's not bad, but I think there's a little bit of a misconception on what he does offensively. And that is that they throw the ball all over the place, that they're taking all sorts of chances, that they're pushing the ball down the field, that he's lining up and doing all this crazy stuff because he's this offensive whiz guy and all this stuff. It's kind of traditional. There's a lot of motions that come along with it. I would imagine that Zack Robinson will take a lot of that with him, but that's more than anything else, just to kind of let the quarterback decide what sort of defense he's looking at. So I think you'll probably get a lot of that, but beyond that, it's pretty typical. Sean McVay runs a million plays out of 11 personnel. They're very rarely not in 11 personnel. I don't know if Zack Robinson brings that with him or not, but it's a pretty traditional offense. When it's running at its best, it's pretty balanced. Sean McVay would tend to get a little pass happy at times and constantly throw the ball even when the running game was working. Again, this is where I think those assistant coaches can become incredibly valuable, because they do hear it, they do see it. And Sean McVay will even say it after the game sometimes where, I don't know what I was thinking, throwing the ball as many times as I was. So until a guy like Robinson and all the other players that you mentioned are out by themselves, it's a little hard to separate what these guys bring relative to what McVay was bringing.
Yeah, I figured that would be your answer on that one. But I'm obviously looking forward to seeing what Zack Robinson will do here in Atlanta, and obviously like that sort of mystery box of like what exactly is his play calling going to be is only making it fueling the fire and making it even more intriguing, because you're like, what is in this magical box over here,
And sometimes it takes a little bit of time too. Like you look at Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, that he goes to Green Bay and everybody's kind of, well, Aaron Rodgers is doing anything. And by the way, probably not an unfair assumption. Well, Aaron Rodgers leaves, Jordan Love steps in, and Matt LaFleur gets to kind of flex his muscles a little bit and turn a relatively inexperienced quarterback into a really good one in a pretty short amount of time. From where Love was at the beginning of the season to the end, I think there was a great deal of improvement. So, it's just sometimes we're not even looking in the right places, and until they get out and there's not the big name, whether it's the quarterback or the coach, it's a little hard to put your finger on what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah. So obviously Raheem Morris brings Zack Robinson and a bunch of other, Rams assistants to Atlanta. Obviously, many of these guys were low-level assistants or only there for a year or two. So I'm not expecting, any sort of deep insights into this, Travis. But some of these other coaches include current Falcons defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. They have defensive assistants like Lance Shelters, offensive assistants like Nick Jones and KJ Black and Tim Burbanick, and strength and conditioning coach John Griffin. Any insight into any of these guys that you willing to share with Falcon fans?
Well, here I can tell you about the strength and conditioning. Is we were talking about this on my radio show, as a matter of fact, today. The Rams never felt like they got out-muscled. It never felt like they got fatigued. It never felt like they weren't competing at a high level at the end of the game. And I give a lot of that credit to Sean McVay, but I give a lot of that credit to who's ever getting those guys ready to go, too. The Rams relatively it's the NFL, so guys are always going to get hurt, but they didn't seem to get this most recent season. They were on the good side of the injury bug. They've been on the good side of the injury bug more often than they haven't. The Super Bowl defense year 2 seasons ago is kind of the exception to that rule, where it seemed like everybody went down. It's kind of funny. You have the consistency that I think a lot of Rams fans are a little bit frustrated with this year, because this is life with Sean McVay. They have success. His coaches go become head coaches, and they take a lot of his staff with them. That these guys all knowing each other, I think, is beneficial for the Falcons, understanding what they want, having worked for and with Raheem for varying degrees of time. But I know the Rams have to replace a lot of guys, because Raheem Morris must have liked a lot of what he saw with what he was working with here in LA.
Yeah, I from what I understand, Brandon Staley took like none of the Rams coaches, and more seemingly taking them all. So I guess that kind of tells you a little bit of something. A little something. Yeah. So, Travis, I really appreciate your insight into these Rams coaches. I'm looking forward to seeing what these guys do in Atlanta. I'm sure, Rams fans will also be looking out from afar to see what some of these guys do as part, and if the Rams season doesn't go the way it is, they'll just blame Raheem Morris for
that's right.
Taking too much brain drain from LA. But kudos to Sean McVay. This is one of the things I say about Sean McVay. Like, the fact that they just keep reloading year after year. They've had more brain drain, for lack of a better term, over the last 7 years than any team that I've ever seen. And yet they continue to find ways to win. So that to me is just a testament to Sean McVay and what type of program he's built in LA.
I think you're right, and I think that you're spot on to mention it, because I don't think it's the thing that gets talked about enough. They get a lot of credit for drafting guys that were kind of under the radar. Puka Nacua being the best example of that recently, and the McVay, the intellect that he brings and the communication with quarterbacks to Matthew Stafford and their ability to do things like that. But like you said, every year it seems like not only do they have to replace a guy or two, but frequently they have to replace 3 or 4 or 5, and many times at very high levels within the organization at the coordinator level, and sometimes more than one, so that he's able to keep that thing going. I know that they just hired their new guy from Iowa State, and Iowa State's frustrated. I'm like, look, this guy's one good season away from being a head coach in the NFL, so he's going to take that job for sure every single time. That's just you stand next to the golden child, a lot of good things happen to you.
Yeah. My personal opinion, I think McVay is the best coach in football. I know, there's other candidates that are worthy of it, but I think when you factor in the success, as we talked about, the ability to just constantly just churning through assistant coaches year after year and competing, that just to me is special. And Andy Reid gets a lot of credit, but I'm not going to take a shot at Andy Reid. But
okay, nor am I, because I love Andy Reid and he's done an amazing job. Here's what I'll say is that Sean McVay took 2 different quarterbacks to the Super Bowl in 4 years. That doesn't happen very often. That if you get on a heater, and that's not easy to do, but it's usually the core is usually head coach and quarterback, and they kind of run that thing through for a while. Head coach and different quarterbacks, and I'll give Kyle Shanahan some credit for this. He's taken some different guys and hasn't quite punched his ticket yet, but it's gotten close. That I think is a degree of difficulty that not many guys can execute.
So, Travis, we could sit here and talk all day about how great a coach Sean McVay is, but we will leave it at that. Go ahead and plug what people can see on Locked On Rams over the course of the offseason.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about, the Rams draft that's coming up here, because for the first time since Jared Goff in 2016, the Rams actually have a first-round draft pick. They have not picked in the first round since 2016. It's been 8 years. They have a first-round pick. I actually think they might use it. We're spending a ton of time on that. And I think one of the questions for the Rams is, where do you go first? Do you go with a guy that can help you right away? Do you package it? Do you send it out? Brian Banks' name still seems to pop up a lot along the way. So that's where we've been spending a lot of our time and talking about all the new coaches that we're getting in LA too.
Okay. Well, I think we're like a month away from the Rams trading that pick for some.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Some Pro Bowler. So we'll see what's what on that one. But Travis, really appreciate your insight into Raheem Morris, Zack Robinson, as well as this sort of Rams pipeline program, whatever you want to call it. But thank you for coming on Locked On Falcons.
Anytime.
Now, don't touch that dial. We're still talking about some things on Locked On Falcons here to wrap things up, including some potential cap cuts and why you shouldn't have to worry about Grady Jarrett or Younghoe Koo being cut this offseason. Now, the offseason for the football is here, but the in-season, I guess, for basketball is still going strong, and that means you can absolutely get buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 if your first bet wins whatever you want, $5 here on there, and you can bet on anything. Quick bets, live same-game parlays, player props. You want to bet on the NBA. You want to bet on the upcoming NCAA tournament. March Madness is right around the corner. You can bet on the NHL, Major League Baseball, spring training, upcoming season. You can bet on the NFL draft, or who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl next year? It's all available at FanDuel. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, I think tomorrow we might look at some under-the-radar prospects if I get a chance to watch the film. That's sort of my plan. That may be in the mix for the Falcons in round one, but we'll see about that. But we'll wrap up today's episode talking about some potential cap cuts. And I came across an article at NFLTradeRumors.co today that listed all the potential cap cuts for the various NFL teams. And they had 5 players listed for the Falcons that were Grady Jarrett, Taylor Heineke, Jonnu Smith, Lorenzo Carter, and Mike Hughes. And we talked to Corey Woodruff yesterday on the podcast, and he mentioned sort of Grady Jarrett being a possibility cut. And I would tend to agree with Corey that it is a possibility. It's, the chances of Grady Jarrett being cut is greater than 0. I think, like Corey expressed, I think it's very unlikely. I wouldn't get out of the single digits I probably wouldn't get above 5% in terms of speculating on the chance of Grady Jarrett being cut this offseason. I would absolutely be floored if that was the case this offseason. But, I'm sure there's going to be some folks out there that will make the case. There's always, you can find any take on the internet. So someone will probably be making the case, if they haven't already done so, that it makes sense for the Falcons to move on from Grady Jarrett. He's going to turn 31 in April. He's coming off an ACL tear. He wasn't even playing at an elite level before he got injured, so he may already be on the decline. And the old adage of I'd rather cut a player a year too early rather than a year too late is sort of the argument that could be made for cutting Grady Jarrett. And yeah, he wasn't playing the best football in 2023. As we've seen him play. He had his lowest pressure rate in 2023, second lowest, I should say. His pressure rate was actually lower in 2021, but second lowest since 2017. But then you look at other metrics like PFF's win rate or win rate on true pass rush sets, and it was like Grady Jarrett's 3rd or 4th best season over the last 7 years. So not as down a year when you look at some of the more advanced things. So I certainly will admit I was a little underwhelmed with Grady Jarrett's performance last year, but I think he absolutely deserves a chance at redemption, I guess you could say. And so to me, depending on kind of the direction where the Falcons go at the quarterback position, not only keeping Grady Jarrett this year, but also keeping him through the last year of his contract, which is currently 2025, makes a ton of sense, especially if the Falcons were to sign Kirk Cousins, where I think the next 2 years, where theoretically you could sign Kirk Cousins to a 2-year contract, you're trying to kind of maximize and put your best foot forward over that 2-year period. So having Grady Jarrett, potentially play out these last 2 years in Atlanta makes a ton of sense. Now, moving past Grady Jarrett, if I was guessing, I would say Taylor Heineke is probably the strongest bet of the remaining 4 players to get cut. He's got a $9 million cap hit. The Falcons can save $7 million if they cut him. And when it comes to, as I've said many times on this podcast, I expect the Falcons to add 2 quarterbacks this offseason, a veteran and a rookie. And if we're talking about, who would you rather have as your QB3, Taylor Heineke at $9 million or Desmond Ridder at $1.5 million, I think the choice is obvious, although I'm sure there are at least one or two comments that say, yeah, it's obviously Taylor Heineke. But, I think at that point in time, you're getting a younger, and I would argue better player, but I know was a controversial opinion to have in the year of 2023 with Desmond Ridder and cheaper as well. So that makes total sense to keep that guy on your roster rather than Taylor Heineke. Now, next on that list in terms of likeliest cuts, I would say Mike Hughes would be next. But does Jerry Gray's retention by the Raheem Morris coaching staff help Mike Hughes? Because we know Mike Hughes and Jerry Gray go back years to their days in Minnesota. But you also factor in the Falcons don't have that many cornerbacks under contract with Jeff Okudah and Trey Flowers hitting free agency. Only 3 corners they have on the roster currently are A.J. Terrell, D. Alford, and Clark Phillips, and 2 of those guys, Phillips and Alford, are arguably nickel corners, and so Mike Hughes could be an outside corner. So that might save him, but he's got a cap hit of nearly roughly $3.8 million. That's a lot to pay for a guy that probably at best is going to be your 5th best corner this upcoming season. So I think the Falcons will move on from him. Jonnu Smith and Lorenzo Carter, to me, at this point in time, are toss-ups. It really kind of depends on what direction this team wants to go. I would say it's likely they get cut. Falcons would save about 6.5 by cutting Jonnu, 3.75 by cutting Lorenzo Carter. Jonnu has a $9 million cap hit. That's a lot to pay for a backup tight end, especially if the team is shifting more towards 11 personnel, those 3 wide receiver sets that Travis was talking about earlier in the episode. I would expect the Falcons will try to get another tight end, but it's going to be more of that true inline Y tight end that Jonnu Smith is not really, if you ask me. Now, Lorenzo Carter's cap hit is about $4.75 million. I've mentioned before on the podcast that I think, you could justify keeping Lorenzo Carter just because, unlike Arnold Ebiketie, unlike D'Angelo Malone, he can actually give you value on run defense and all that stuff. I could see a scenario where the Falcons ask Lorenzo Carter to take a pay cut, maybe slash his base salary in half of $3.75 million down to something under $2 million. We'll see. But right now, sitting here today as this offseason is shaking out, because it's not a deep draft class at edge rusher, I expect the Falcons to be very proactive in free agency to upgrade that edge rusher position. And I think you not only can get someone who can be a better pass rusher than Lorenzo Carter, but you can also get someone that's also a capable run defender as well. That also brings you more pass rushing, so you're going to potentially get more bang for your buck there. So I do think the Falcons will ultimately move on from Lorenzo Carter, but I do think he does add probably a little bit more value than probably most would consider. So I would say of these, besides Grady Jarrett, between Heineke, Hughes, Jonnu Smith, and Lorenzo Carter to me is the guy that makes the most sense to bring back, but we'll see. Now, we teased this weeks ago where we talked about, our positional breakdowns, and we didn't do a special teams breakdown, but I mentioned sort of offhandedly that I saw something over at overthecap.com that indicated, I couldn't find the article when I searched for it earlier today, but basically it seemed to indicate that an adjustment to Younghoe Koo's contract was going to come. And I don't think Koo's a candidate to be a cap cut, but certainly a restructure, right? He's got a cap hit of $5.25 million this year. That's a lot of money to pay for a kicker. That would make him currently the 6th highest paid kicker in the NFL in 2024. The Falcons could theoretically cut him and save about $1.5 million, but they could also restructure him and do a max restructure, convert his base salary into bonus money, and they would save closer to $2 million in that regard. And I think that's probably the path the Falcons will go. Younghoe Koo has 2 bad games every year, and we're like, what's going on with Younghoe Koo? Why did he miss these kicks? Why did he miss this extra point in this game? And maybe it winds up costing the Falcons a win or so. But the rest of the season, he's pretty much lights out. And so he follows the trend that we've talked about a bunch over the last, 2 months here on this podcast, that the Falcons just find ways to get 90% of the way there. That Younghoe Koo is 90% of the way to being a perfect, all-timer type of kicker. And we just got to clean up that 10%. So I'm not expecting Younghoe Koo to go anywhere, right? Sure, you could find a cheaper kicker, but I don't know if you're going to find someone who's automatically going to give you 95% of what you're looking for at the kicker position, if you follow what I'm saying. So those are the potential cap cuts for the Falcons. We'll see if, some surprises spring up on our radar over the next couple of weeks. We got about 3+ weeks until the league year starts. So we'll see what's what on that. And we'll see what's what on tomorrow's episode as your first listen. I don't 100% know what we're going to talk about, but maybe we'll get into some more draft prospects that, that are under the radar currently, that maybe some sleepers for the Falcons in their early round picks, including maybe a D tackle that I want to get my eyes on as a potential heir apparent to Grady Jarrett. So that may be in store for you guys on tomorrow's episode. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 YouTube streaming channels as well. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft, and check out Locked On Rams as well. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.